Attention, everyone. Before we dive into this chilling story, I have a question for you. Where are you watching from today? Drop your answer in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video if you're as shocked as you're about to be. The ballroom of the Grand Paragon Hotel in Brighton fell into a dead silence. Elara Davis, seated in her wheelchair, watched her husband, Julian Thorne, as he placed his arm around his pregnant mistress in front of 200 stunned guests. "I'd like to introduce everyone to Isla," Julian announced proudly, "not only as the new creative director of our firm, but as the mother of my children and the future I've always dreamed of." Camera flashes erupted as Julian looked directly at Elara, his wife of 12 years, who had been disabled. With a mix of pity and scorn, "Sometimes life gives us a second chance at happiness," he continued, raising his champagne glass. But as tears welled in Elara's eyes, something unexpected happened. She smiled, and that smile sent a shiver down Julian's spine. 3 years ago, Elara and Julian Thorne were the golden couple of the British architecture world. Their modern glass home overlooking the South Downs perfectly reflected their success. He was the charismatic businessman who closed deals. She was the brilliant architect whose award-winning designs changed city skylines. They complemented each other perfectly. Julian knew how to sell Elara's vision, and Elara knew how to make Julian's promises a reality, recalled Karina, a former colleague of Elara's. But everything changed on a rainy Tuesday in November. The accident at the Riverside Quarter complex should have been impossible. Safety protocols were Elara's obsession. Yet, a temporary platform collapsed while she was inspecting the 14th floor of her newest project. "The fall crushed her spine," explained Dr. Anya Sharma, the neurologist who treated Elara. "Initially, we weren't sure if she'd ever walk again. After 3 surgeries and months of grueling rehabilitation, Elara could walk short distances with the help of a walker, but she remained dependent on a wheelchair for her daily life. Her schedule, once full of site visits and design meetings, shrank to physical therapy and doctor's appointments. And Julian, the man who had sworn to stand by her in sickness and in health, began a subtle but unmistakable withdrawal. To the outside world, Julian Thorne remained the devoted husband. He hired the best specialists, renovated their home to be accessible, and spoke movingly at charity galas about their journey. "My wife has shown incredible courage," he'd say, his hand resting protectively on Elara's shoulder. "Her resilience inspires me every day." But behind closed doors, a different reality emerged. Cold silences, missed dinners, and a growing resentment. The annual Oakwood Foundation Gala was in full swing, with crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow over London's elite. Elara Davis was seated near the edge of the grand ballroom, her wheelchair positioned at a table partially hidden behind a large floral arrangement. From her vantage point, she could watch her husband, Julian, command the room. At 42, he was still strikingly handsome. His salt and pepper hair and bespoke tuxedo gave him the distinguished air of success. He moved effortlessly between groups, each laugh and handshake cementing business relationships worth millions. "He really does know how to work a room," commented an older woman who had joined Elara at her table. "Your husband has the city commissioner eating out of the palm of his hand." Elara smiled politely. "Julian has always been good with people." What she didn't say was how she had begun to measure the distance between them, not just the physical space across the ballroom, but the growing emotional chasm that had opened since her accident. They had met 15 years earlier at Cambridge University. Elara Davis, the serious student from a family of engineers, and Julian Thorne, the charismatic scholarship student with big dreams and even bigger ambition. "He asked me to look over his design project," Elara later told her twin sister Lana. "It was terrible, all facade and no function. I told him his beautiful tower would collapse in the first strong wind. Instead of being offended, Julian had laughed and asked her to dinner. "Teach me," he had told her. "I want to learn from the best." Their romance blossomed quickly. Julian's charm balanced Alara's intensity. Her precision complemented his vision. After graduation, they were partners in every sense, launching Thorne Davis Sustainable Design with nothing but student loans and determination. Their first projects were small: a restaurant renovation, an eco-friendly dental office. But their reputation grew steadily. Alara's innovative designs prioritized sustainability and accessibility long before they became industry buzzwords. Julian secured clients and funding, his natural charisma opening doors that remained closed to many young architects. The breakthrough came 8 years ago when they won the commission for Urban Gardens, a mixed-use development that transformed a derelict industrial site into an award-winning green community. "Urban Gardens put us on the map," Julian often said in interviews. "That's when I knew we were going to change the world." Success brought wealth, recognition, and increasingly ambitious projects. The small firm expanded, becoming the Thorne Group Developments. The name change was a sudden pivot Alara had initially resisted, but came to accept as good business. Their personal life seemed equally charmed. Weekends at their country house in the Lake District, vacations exploring architectural wonders across Europe and Asia, plans to have children repeatedly deferred for one larger project, until those conversations gradually faded away. At the gala, Alara glanced at her watch. It was nearly 10 p.m., and Julian had barely acknowledged her since their arrival. She watched him chatting animatedly with Commissioner Thorne, the urban planning commissioner whose approval they needed for their newest development. Alara's phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "Don't forget your 10 p.m. meds. How's the gala?" Surviving the small talk? Alara smiled, grateful for her physiotherapist's concern. Maya was one of the few bright spots in her life after the accident. Tough during their sessions, but always unconditionally supportive outside of them. Watching Julian work his magic, she typed, "I'm practically invisible." "Their loss," Maya texted back immediately. "Want me to come and stage a very convincing medical emergency?" Alara laughed, drawing a curious glance from her table companion. "Is our session tomorrow still at 2 p.m.? She texted. "Yes, and wear comfortable clothes. We're trying something new." Alara was about to reply when she noticed Julian approaching with Commissioner Thorne. "And here is the creative genius behind our accessibility initiatives," Julian announced warmly, his hand resting on Alara's shoulder with practiced affection. "My wife insists that every Thorne project must be accessible to everyone." Alara forced a smile. "It's just good design. Buildings should work for all people." "How admirable!" the commissioner exclaimed. "Julian was just telling me about your accident. Such a tragedy for someone so talented." Alara held her smile, even as she registered Julian's narrative in action, presenting her as the inspiring tragedy, her career spoken of in the past tense. "I still consult on all our projects," Alara said firmly. "In fact, I've been working on some modifications to the West Hill proposal that I'd love to discuss with your office." The commissioner looked momentarily confused, glancing at Julian, who smoothly interjected. "Alara likes to keep abreast of things when her health allows. Now, Commissioner, about that height variance." And just like that, Alara was steered away from her own project. She watched Julian guide the commissioner away, already immersed in technical discussions that were once Alara's domain. Later that night, as their driver helped Alara into her adapted SUV, Julian consulted his phone, his face illuminated by the screen's glow. "Marcus wants to meet up for breakfast before the board presentation," he said, without looking up. "I'll have Isla bring you your breakfast tray in the morning." "I could go to the presentation," Alara suggested. "It's our firm." Julian's smile was strained. "It's just finance. Terribly boring. You're better off resting for your therapy session." At home, their modern mansion had been retrofitted with ramps and lifts after Ilara's accident. What was once their showpiece of architectural innovation now felt to Ilara like an elaborate cage. Julian helped her into the elevator with practiced efficiency, supportive but distant, like a nurse with a patient. In their bedroom, he laid out her nightgown and medication while she wheeled herself to her accessible bathroom. Looking at her reflection, Ilara noted the changes 3 years had made. Still beautiful at 39, but her face had thinned, permanent dark circles under her eyes. Her body, once athletic, now altered by both injury and inactivity, felt like a stranger's. When she emerged, Julian was already in bed, consulting his phone. "Fonseca confirmed the investment," he mentioned without looking up. $30 million for the Sunnyside Park development. "That's wonderful," Ilara said, struggling slightly as she transferred from her wheelchair to the bed. Julian didn't move to help, something that would have once shocked her, but now felt routine. "I'm heading to Paris next weekend to finalize the details," he continued. "Just 2 nights?" Ilara nodded, noting another business trip added to Julian's increasingly busy travel schedule. "The Paris team could come here," she suggested. "Or I could come with you. I haven't traveled in months." Julian finally looked up from his phone, his expression a mix of impatience and pity. "Ilara, be realistic. The logistics of traveling with your situation are complicated. The team needs my undivided attention." The words stung, but Ilara had grown accustomed to such subtle dismissals. "Of course," she said quietly. "It makes sense." Julian reached out and patted her hand, a gesture that felt more condescending than affectionate. "That's my practical girl. Now take your medication. You know how hard it is for you to sleep without it." Ilara obediently swallowed the pills Julian handed her, wondering when she had become someone who accepted these small humiliations without protest. As Julian turned off his light and settled into sleep, Ilara remained awake, staring at the ceiling. Her room, like her marriage, had been redesigned after her accident. Her hospital-grade adjustable bed, positioned for accessibility, separated from Julian's premium mattress by a discreet but impassable gap. Have you ever felt dismissed or isolated by someone you trusted? What did you do to reclaim your sense of worth? The next morning, Ilara woke up in an empty house. Julian had left early for his meeting with Marcus, leaving a handwritten note propped up by the coffee maker. "Breakfast in the fridge. Isla arrives at 10. Remember your pills." Ilara crumpled the note, irritated by its patronizing tone. She made her own coffee, stronger than the weak brew Isla made, and wheeled herself to Julian's office. Since her accident, Ilara had been gradually shut out of the firm's daily operations. Her architect's license remained active, but her projects were increasingly being modified by the firm's growing team. With Julian's approval, she perused Julian's immaculate desk, looking for the West Hill proposal she had mentioned to the commissioner. Nothing. The computer was password protected, and Ilara realized with a start that she no longer knew Julian's password, something that would have been unthinkable 3 years ago. She was about to leave when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I'm sorry, but you deserve to know the truth about your husband." Attached was a photo that would change everything. Julian, his arm intimately around a beautiful younger woman with a visibly pregnant belly, exiting what looked like a private medical clinic. The timestamp showed the previous afternoon, when Julian had claimed to be in meetings preparing for the board presentation. The photo burned in Ilara's mind as she waited for Julian to return home. The face of the pregnant woman was unfamiliar, but the look of tenderness on Julian's face was one Ilara hadn't seen directed at her in years. When Julian finally arrived that night, Ilara had composed herself, the phone with the incriminating photo tucked into the pocket of her wheelchair. "How did the board presentation go?" she asked casually as he loosened his tie. A success. We've secured funding for the West Hill expansion. Julian poured himself a scotch without offering one to Ilara as he used to. How was therapy? Enlightening, Ilara replied. Julian, who is Isla? The question hung in the air. Julian's hand stopped mid-sip, the only indication that the name meant anything to him. Isla Brooks, he said smoothly after a moment. Our new project manager for West Hill. Why do you ask? Ilara held his gaze. Is there something you'd like to tell me about your relationship with her? Julian set his glass down with careful precision. She's a talented professional I'm mentoring. Ilara, what is this about? Without a word, Ilara took out her phone and showed him the photo. Julian's expression hardened, but he didn't look particularly surprised. You're spying on me now? His voice was cold. Someone sent me this, I don't know who. Julian's laugh was humorless, and you immediately jumped to the worst conclusion. She's pregnant, Julian? Yes, she is, and her husband is quite excited about it. Julian's lie was delivered with practiced conviction. He had accompanied her to her appointment because she had felt faint at the office. As her mentor, he was concerned. Ilara wanted to believe him. A part of her, the part that remembered the man who had once adored her, desperately needed his explanation to be true. Her husband, Ilara repeated quietly. Liam Reynolds. He works for Capital Bank. You met him at the Christmas party. Julian's details were specific, convincing. Is that what you think of me, Ilara? That I would be involved with a married, pregnant woman? Put that way, it sounded absurd. Ilara felt doubt creep in. The person who sent this suggested. Who sent it? Julian interrupted, suddenly alert. Sounds to me like someone is trying to cause trouble. Probably jealous of our success. When Ilara admitted she didn't know, Julian nodded knowingly. Anonymous accusations aren't worth your energy. Now, I need to review some contracts before dinner. As Julian left the room, Ilara felt a familiar disorientation. The sense that maybe she was the one being irrational, seeing problems where they didn't exist. It was a feeling that had become increasingly common since her accident. But something about Julian's too-perfect explanation unsettled her. That night, she lay awake long after Julian fell asleep, her mind returning to small inconsistencies in his behavior over the past months. The next morning, Ilara made a decision. If Julian was telling the truth, there was nothing to worry about. But if he wasn't... She called Isla, her housekeeper. I'd like to do some online shopping this afternoon. Could you help me set up my laptop in Julian's office? The light is better in there. Once alone in Julian's office, Ilara moved quickly. First, she set up a tiny wireless camera she had ordered weeks ago for security purposes, hiding it amongst the books on Julian's bookshelf. Then, she began to search his desk drawers. Most contained ordinary business documents, but at the very bottom of the lowest drawer, she found a small key she didn't recognize. Pocketing it, she continued her search until Isla called her for lunch. For the next week, Ilara established a new routine. Every day while Julian was at work, she would review the hidden camera footage, looking for anything unusual. Most nights, Julian would spend a few hours in his office reviewing documents or making calls. Nothing suspicious. Then came Tuesday night. Julian entered his office at his usual time, but locked the door, something he rarely did. Ilara watched the live feed on her tablet as he made a call, his voice too low for her to hear clearly, but his expression was unmistakably intimate, his smile private. After the call, Julian unlocked his desk with the small key Ilara had discovered, the same drawer that had appeared empty during her search. He pulled out what looked like a small black ledger and took several notes before returning it and locking the drawer again. The next day, while Julian was at a site visit, Ilara used the key she had found. The black ledger was a separate accounting book documenting transfers to offshore accounts not mentioned in any of their joint financial statements. Large sums, hundreds of thousands of pounds, moving to numbered accounts in the Cayman Islands. More unsettling were the notes in the margins. Apartment deposit Isla. Isla's car. Ila's medical care. Ila. Ilara photographed every page before returning the ledger exactly as she had found it. That same afternoon, she called Karina, her old colleague from their early days at Thorne Davis. "Ilara, it's been ages. How are you holding up?" Karina sounded genuinely pleased to hear from her. "Karina, I need to ask you something in confidence," Ilara replied. "Do you know anything about a project manager named Isla Brooks?" A pause. "Isla. Young, stunning, always impeccably dressed. Early 30s. That's the one," Ilara said. "She's been with the Thorne Group for about a year. A rising star." Karina hesitated. "Ilara, there have been rumors." "About what?" Julian seems particularly invested in her career. Late-night meetings, private lunches. The office gossip machine goes into overdrive whenever they're together. Karina sighed. "I didn't want to say anything without proof after everything you've been through." Ilara's suspicions crystallized into certainty. "Thank you for being honest. One more thing. Is she married? To someone named Liam Reynolds?" Karina's laugh confirmed what Ilara already knew. "Isla? No, she's definitely single. In fact, she makes a point of mentioning it." After she hung up, Ilara felt a strange calm. The hurt of confirmation was mixed with validation. She wasn't imagining things or being paranoid. That night, she watched Julian more carefully, noting how he consulted his phone whenever it buzzed. The slight smile as he read certain messages. After dinner, he announced another business trip for the following week. 3 days in Paris for the Lighthouse project, he said casually. "That's interesting," Ilara responded, keeping her voice neutral. "I thought the Lighthouse presentation wasn't until next month." Julian barely hesitated. "They moved up the deadline. These developers are always in a rush." Another lie. Ilara had seen an email on Julian's computer screen that very morning, confirming the Lighthouse presentation for its original date. After Julian retired to his office, Ilara wheeled herself into the guest room and opened her laptop. It was time to be methodical. She created a secure document and began to list everything she knew for sure. Julian was lying about Isla's marital status. He was moving large sums of money into undisclosed accounts. Some of these funds appeared to be supporting Isla. He was lying about his travel schedule. She needed more evidence, but her instincts told her this was only the beginning. The Julian she had married would never have betrayed her in this way. When had he changed? Or had he always been capable of this deception? And had she simply been too much in love to see it? Ilara's meticulous search for the truth has revealed a darker secret than just an affair. What do you think she will do with this information? What kind of revenge, if any, do you think she should pursue? The next morning, Ilara called Maya, her physiotherapist. "I need a favor," she said bluntly. "Something outside of your professional duties." "I'm intrigued," Maya replied. And concerned, Ilara hesitated, then decided that full honesty was necessary. "I need you to help me follow my husband. I think he's having an affair." A beat of silence. Then, "I'll pick you up at 7. Wear dark clothes." That night, Maya drove them to a fancy restaurant in her modest car, parking where they could see the entrance. Sure enough, at 8:15, Julian arrived. Not in his usual Tesla, but in an Uber. 10 minutes later, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up, and Isla emerged, her pregnancy now unmistakable even under her stylish coat. Ilara watched through binoculars as Julian greeted Isla with a kiss that was not exactly mentor-like, his hand settling on her pregnant belly with obvious pride. "I've seen enough," Ilara said quietly. Maya squeezed her hand. "Now what?" Now I find out how deep this goes. For the next 2 weeks, Ilara methodically built her case. She found credit card statements that showed purchases of jewelry from a high-end jeweler she had never received. She found reservations for a weekend getaway in the Peak District during Julian's supposed Paris trip. Most unsettlingly, she uncovered a deed for a luxury penthouse bought in Julian's name alone, not listed among their marital assets. The property was in the Skyline Tower, their newest residential tower still under construction. Then came the most painful discovery of all. While looking for more financial records in Julian's office, Ilara found a small velvet box hidden beneath a false bottom in his desk drawer. Inside was no jewelry, but rather an ultrasound image labeled Baby Thorn, 24 weeks, with Isla's name clearly printed at the top. Ilara was staring at the image, tears blurring her vision, when she heard Julian's voice behind her. "What in God's name did you think you're doing?" She turned to find him in the doorway, his expression a combination of anger and panic. "Finding the truth," she replied, holding up the ultrasound. "Your mentee is expecting your child." Julian's face hardened. "You had no right to go through my things." "I had no right?" Ilara's voice rose. "I'm your wife. That ultrasound should have been of our baby." "This is exactly why I hid it from you," Julian exclaimed. "Look at you, emotional, hysterical. You aren't stable enough to handle the truth." "I'm not stable?" Ilara was incredulous. "You're having an affair, moving money offshore, buying properties I know nothing about, and I'm not stable." Julian approached, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "Ilara, you haven't been well since the accident. The doctors warned me about the possible psychological effects of your trauma and medication. Paranoia, delusions of persecution." "Don't you dare," Ilara whispered. "Don't you dare use my mental health against me." But Julian continued, his tone shifting to a concern so convincing it was almost believable. "I've been worried about you for months. These conspiracy theories, the hidden cameras. Yes, I found it," he added upon seeing her surprise. "Ilara, you need help." "What I need is a divorce lawyer," she retorted. Something glinted in Julian's eyes. Calculation, not hurt. "If that's what you think is best. But I should warn you, any judge will take your mental state into consideration when dividing assets, especially given how erratic you've been since the accident." The threat was implicit but clear. "Challenge me, and I'll make you look unstable." After Julian left, Ilara sat trembling in her wheelchair, the ultrasound still clutched in her hand. She had expected anger, maybe even relief at being caught. But this calculated gaslighting was something far more sinister. That night, Ilara overheard Julian on the phone in his office. The door wasn't completely closed. "She found the ultrasound," he said in a low voice. "No, don't worry. I've been documenting her erratic behavior for months. My lawyer says we have options." "Yes, a psychological evaluation would be the first step." "Of course. I'll make sure you and the baby are taken care of." Ilara wheeled herself silently back to her room. A cold understanding washed over her. Julian wasn't just planning to leave her. He was laying the groundwork to have her declared mentally incompetent. The implications were staggering. Control over her medical decisions, her finances, her very freedom. For the first time since discovering Julian's betrayal, a genuine fear gripped her. This was no longer just about infidelity. It was about survival. The next morning, Ilara woke with a clear mind and a decision. If Julian wanted a war, she would need to be strategic in her response. Acting emotionally would only play into his narrative of her mental instability. She started with her medications. For months, she had unquestioningly accepted the pills Julian provided her every morning and night, a combination of painkillers, muscle relaxants, and sleeping aids prescribed by various specialists. "Could you look at something for me?" she asked Maya. during her next therapy session. She showed Maya the collection of pill bottles from her medicine cabinet. Maya examined each one carefully, her expression growing concerned. "Ilara, how long have you been on this combination?" "About 8 months. Why?" Maya pointed to 2 of the bottles. "This muscle relaxant in this dose would make anyone feel dizzy and disoriented. And this one, it's no longer commonly prescribed for your type of injury. It's known to cause memory problems and confusion with long-term use." A chill went down Ilara's stomach. "Julian manages my medication schedule. He says it's too complicated for me to keep track of." Maya's face hardened. "I think it's time you saw a different neurologist, one you choose yourself." Dr. Evelyn Reed, a neurologist recommended by Maya, reviewed Ilara's medical history with growing concern. "Ms. Davis, several of these medications are contraindicated for your condition, and the dosages are unusually high." She looked up from her tablet. "Who has been supervising your prescription regimen?" "My family doctor, Dr. Davis," Ilara answered. "He works closely with my husband." Dr. Reed frowned. "I see multiple prescriptions from different specialists, but limited consultation between them." She hesitated. "With your permission, I'd like to do a full blood workup and develop a more appropriate treatment plan." The test results confirmed Dr. Reed's suspicions. Ilara's blood showed higher than prescribed levels of certain medications, suggesting someone had been increasing her dosages without medical authorization. This combination would cause fatigue, confusion, and memory problems, Dr. Reed explained gently. It might have even been hindering your physical recovery. With the doctor's guidance, Ilara began carefully tapering off the unnecessary medications. The process was uncomfortable, but within 2 weeks, she noticed significant differences. Her mind felt clearer, her energy improved, and most revealingly, her physical therapy sessions showed measurable progress. "You've made more progress in the last 10 days than in the previous 3 months, Maya pointed out during a particularly successful session. Meanwhile, Ilara continued to build her case against Julian, now with a clearer mind and a renewed purpose. She hired a private investigator recommended by Dr. Reed, who had, unfortunately, seen similar cases of medical manipulation in her practice. The investigator, Carly Evans, was efficient and discreet. Within days, she provided Ilara with a complete timeline of Julian's relationship with Isla Brooks, including evidence that they had been involved for more than 16 months before Ilara's accident. "They met at a development conference in Paris," Carly explained, showing Ilara photos from the event. "According to my sources, she was hired at the Thorn Group less than a month later." Ilara looked at the images of Julian and Isla at a hotel bar, his hand resting possessively on her back. The timestamp showed February of last year, 3 months before her accident. "Oh, something else you need to know," Carly continued, a hesitation in her voice. "I pulled the inspection records for the construction site where your accident occurred, and the temporary platform that collapsed had been flagged for reinforcement the week before. The work order was signed as completed, but there's no record of the actual repairs being done." Ilara frowned. "That happens sometimes on busy sites. Documentation gets ahead of the actual work." "Right," Carly nodded. "But the signature on the completion form belongs to Julian Thorne." Ilara's blood ran cold. "Are you suggesting Julian knew the platform was unsafe when I visited the site?" Carly chose her words carefully. "I'm saying the timing is concerning. The accident happened 3 weeks after Ms. Brooks was hired, at a site Julian had personally signed off as safe, despite documented structural concerns. The implication was almost too monstrous to contemplate. Ilara had always assumed her fall was a tragic accident. The idea that Julian could have knowingly allowed her to use unsafe equipment was unthinkable. Yet as she reviewed the evidence Carly had compiled, unsettling patterns emerged. After her accident, Julian had taken control of her medical care with a shocking efficiency. He had insisted on specific doctors, managed all her medications, and had gradually isolated her from colleagues and friends. "It's too much for you right now," he would say, whenever she mentioned visiting the office or attending industry events. "Just focus on your recovery." Ilara reconnected with Karina, this time with more specific questions about her attempt to return to work 6 months after the accident. "I always thought it was strange," Karina admitted. "You were slated to come back part-time. Your office was ready, and all of a sudden Julian announced you'd had a setback and needed more time." "I don't remember any setback," Ilara said slowly. "Julian told me the accessibility adaptations weren't ready yet." Karina's silence was eloquent. "Ilara, the adaptations were completed 2 weeks ahead of schedule. I supervised them myself." The picture that was becoming clearer was deeply disturbing. Julian had not only been unfaithful, but had been systematically undermining Ilara's recovery and independence while creating a narrative that she was too incapacitated and mentally unstable to function professionally. With Maya's help, Ilara contacted a rehabilitation specialist who drew up an intensive therapy program away from Julian's watchful eye. 3 times a week, while Julian thought she was attending art therapy sessions he had suggested, and supposedly overseen by a therapist who was in reality Maya's cousin, Ilara was working to rebuild her strength and mobility. The progress was slow but steady. As the unnecessary medications left her system, Ilara found she could stand for longer periods and even take several steps with only a cane. Breakthroughs Julian had repeatedly told her were unlikely given her condition. "He was never at the doctor's appointments, was he?" Ilara asked Maya one day. "The ones where they supposedly told me my prognosis was poor?" Maya shook her head. "I've reviewed your full medical history. Multiple specialists pointed to good potential for significant recovery with aggressive physical therapy. Therapy Julian repeatedly canceled or rescheduled." Armed with this knowledge, Ilara contacted Ben Carter, a lawyer who specialized in elder abuse and financial fraud. Although she was not elderly, Ben explained that many of the same legal protections applied to disabled people who were exploited by caregivers or family members. "What you're describing is a textbook case of gaslighting, medical abuse, and financial exploitation," Ben explained during their confidential meeting. "The medication tampering alone is potentially criminal." "I need to be careful," Ilara explained. "Julian has significant resources and connections, and he's been documenting my supposed mental instability to use against me." Ben nodded gravely. "Then we document everything and prepare for the right moment. Most importantly, we ensure your physical safety as we build the case." Safety had become a genuine concern. As Ilara tapered off her medication and became more lucid, Julian's behavior grew increasingly controlling. He installed a security system that sent him alerts when exterior doors opened. He started checking her pill bottles to make sure she was following his medication regimen, which forced Ilara to develop elaborate systems to maintain her deception. Through Carly's investigation, Ilara uncovered something even more alarming. Julian had consulted an attorney who specialized in guardianships for mentally incapacitated adults. "He's laying the groundwork to take legal control of your affairs," Ben alerted her when Ilara shared this information. "We need to accelerate our timeline." Ilara nodded, but insisted they be thorough. "I want him to be fully exposed, not just the affair, but all of it. The financial fraud, the medical manipulation, and possibly his role in my accident." The final piece fell into place when Carly located Sam Jenkins, a former security guard at the construction site where Ilara's accident occurred. Initially reluctant to talk, Sam finally agreed to meet Ilara at Ben's office. "I wasn't supposed to be there that day," Sam explained nervously. "I switched shifts with another guard. That's why he came to me afterwards." "He?" Ilara asked. "Your husband. 2 days after your accident. He asked me to delete specific footage from the security server." Sam couldn't look Alara in the eye. He said it showed you in a private moment, upset, crying, and that he wanted to protect your dignity. He offered me £5,000 cash. Did you delete it? Ben asked. Sam nodded. But I'm not completely stupid. I made a copy first, just in case, you know? Never thought I'd need it. The footage, stored on an old USB drive Sam had kept hidden, was grainy but clear enough. It showed Julian at the construction site in the early morning on the day of Alara's accident, examining the temporary platform. The timestamp was 6:42 a.m., nearly 3 hours before Alara's scheduled inspection. More incriminating was the second clip from the same morning. Julian talking to the site foreman, pointing at the platform, and then handing him an envelope. The foreman nodded, pocketed the envelope, and walked away. No work was done on the platform. Alara watched the footage in horrified silence. While it wasn't definitive proof that Julian had intentionally caused her accident, it clearly showed that he knew the platform was unsafe and did nothing to stop her from using it. This crosses into potentially criminal territory, Ben said in a low voice. Negligence at a minimum, attempted murder at worst. Alara felt strangely calm as the final pieces fell into place. We need copies of everything. Secure copies Julian can't get to or destroy. As they developed their strategy, Alara learned through Karina that Julian was planning the annual firm gala, traditionally held at a downtown hotel, at their own house. He says it's to make it easier for you to attend, Karina explained, the doubt evident in her voice. Alara immediately recognized the opportunity this presented. When exactly is it? 3 weeks from now, on a Saturday. Julian's very involved in the planning. Through careful observation and strategic questions, Alara uncovered the true purpose of hosting the gala at their home. Julian planned to announce Isla as his new business partner and publicly introduce her as the mother of his child, effectively declaring his new future while Alara was present. It's breathtakingly cruel, Maya said, when Alara shared this discovery. To humiliate you in your own home, in front of colleagues and friends. Alara's smile was tight. Actually, it's perfect. He's creating the exact stage I need. With the gala 3 weeks away, Alara sprang into action, coordinating with her growing team of allies. Ben prepared legal documents while Carly gathered the last bits of evidence they needed. Maya intensified Alara's physical therapy, focusing on building the stamina she would need for what was to come. We need to be methodical, Alara insisted during a strategy session at Ben's office. Julian expects me to break down or react violently. He's counting on emotional reactions he can use to support his narrative about my mental state. Ben nodded in approval. The evidence we've gathered is compelling, but the timing and presentation will be crucial. Alara had reconnected with her twin sister, Lana, from whom she had been estranged for the past few years. A separation she now recognized as part of Julian's systematic isolation tactics. He always said you were too busy with your cybersecurity projects to visit, Alara explained during their emotional reunion. Lana's face hardened. I tried to visit you so many times after your accident. Julian always said you were too tired or in too much pain to see anyone. She squeezed Alara's hand. I knew something was wrong when my birthday presents to you went unacknowledged. We never miss each other's birthday. With her digital security expertise, Lana proved invaluable to their efforts. She helped Alara access Julian's password-protected files, revealing a treasure trove of incriminating information. Emails discussing the offshore accounts where he had hidden millions in firm profits. Correspondence with Isla that dated back to before Alara's accident. Communications with doctors, instructing them to emphasize Alara's limitations rather than her potential for recovery. Research into medications known to cause cognitive impairment and confusion. Detailed plans for the penthouse being prepared for Isla, paid for with funds from their charity foundation. He's been siphoning money from our foundation? Ilara was stunned. The Thorn Foundation for Accessible Design had been her most passionate project, funding ramps, lifts, and other modifications to make public spaces accessible for everyone. According to these records, he's diverted over £2 million in the last year alone, Lana confirmed, scrolling through financial documents. The money supposedly went to accessibility projects that were never completed. The depth of Julian's betrayal felt unfathomable. Beyond the affair and the medical manipulation, he had corrupted Ilara's life's work, using funds meant to help disabled people to finance his new life with Isla. Ilara insisted on maintaining absolute secrecy as they prepared. She continued to take the placebos Maya had prepared instead of her actual medications, allowing Julian to believe she was still foggy and dependent. She feigned excitement for the upcoming gala, even offering suggestions for the menu and decorations. "I want everything to be perfect," she told Julian with carefully calibrated enthusiasm. "It's been so long since I was a part of a firm event." Julian's smile didn't reach his eyes. "That's the spirit, Ilara. It's important for everyone to see us together, as a united front." The irony of his statement was not lost on Ilara. 2 weeks before the gala, Ilara met with Chloe Matthews, an investigative journalist known for her reporting on corporate corruption. Ben had insisted on this connection, arguing that media coverage would provide an additional layer of protection. Once this is public, it will be much harder for Julian to retaliate or manipulate the narrative, Ben explained. Chloe was immediately drawn to Ilara's story. "This goes beyond a personal betrayal," she pointed out, reviewing the evidence. "The foundation fraud, the construction safety violations, the possible medical negligence. It's systemic corruption with real victims." "I want to be very clear," Ilara emphasized. "This isn't about revenge. It's about accountability and making sure Julian can't do this to anyone else." Chloe studied Ilara carefully. "Your self-control is remarkable, considering what you've endured." Ilara's smile was tight. "I've had a lot of time to think while sitting in this wheelchair." As the gala approached, Ilara worked with Lana to ensure their technical preparations were flawless. Hidden cameras were placed strategically throughout the main floor of their house. The presentation system Julian planned to use for his firm announcement was subtly modified to allow Ilara to take control when needed. "He won't be able to shut it down remotely," Lana assured her. "Once you initiate the sequence, it will play through, no matter what anyone does." Julian remained oblivious to these preparations, interpreting Ilara's increased energy as excitement at returning to a social life. If he noticed she was taking slightly longer trips around the house in her wheelchair, or that she occasionally stood to reach something from a bookshelf, he didn't comment, perhaps assuming his gaslighting had been so effective that she wouldn't dare to expect substantial improvement. 1 week before the gala, Ilara met with Inspector Roberts, the city building inspector, who had reviewed the documents regarding Julian's construction site safety violations. "These aren't minor oversights," Inspector Roberts confirmed, with a grave expression. "We're talking about a systemic disregard for basic safety protocols. If these allegations prove accurate, the Thorn Group could face significant sanctions and possibly criminal charges." Ilara provided copies of all the relevant documents. "I want this handled through the proper channels," she insisted, setting aside my personal situation. "People's lives are at risk." The night before the gala, Ilara sat in her studio, the only room in their house that still felt truly hers. Once filled with architectural models and design plans, it now contained her careful documentation of Julian's betrayal. Every piece of evidence was stored in multiple secure locations, with copies held by Ben on Lana's encrypted servers, and in a safe accessible only to Ilara. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "All set for tomorrow? Are you ready?" Ilara looked into the mirror. The woman looking back was no longer the broken, confused person Julian had cultivated. Her eyes were clear, her posture straight even while seated in her wheelchair. The unnecessary medications had been flushed from her system, and the intensive physical therapy had restored more function than Julian had believed was possible. "Ready?" she texted back. And then she added, "He has no idea what's coming." That night, Julian was unusually attentive, bringing Alara a cup of her favorite tea as she prepared for bed. "Big day tomorrow," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You excited to see everyone?" Alara took the tea, noting the familiar faint bitterness that suggested he had added her medication directly to the drink, something he had started doing recently when he suspected she might be skipping doses. "Very excited," she replied, pretending to sip while actually letting the liquid fall into the planter beside her bed, a trick she had perfected over weeks. "It feels like the start of something new." Julian's smile widened. "It is. A new chapter." If he noted the double meaning in their exchange, he gave no indication. As he prepared to leave, Alara called out softly, "Julian, do you remember what you told me the day you proposed? About how you loved me?" He paused, momentarily thrown off by the sentimentality of the question. "I said a lot of things that day. You said you loved my mind, that I was the smartest person you had ever met." Alara's smile was soft. "I've been thinking about that lately." Julian's expression flickered with something, perhaps a moment of genuine regret, before his mask of the attentive husband returned. "Get some rest, Alara. Tomorrow's an important day." As the door closed behind him, Alara whispered to the empty room, "Yes, it certainly is. The night of the gala has arrived, and Alara's plan is in motion. What do you think will happen when she confronts Julian and Isla? How do you think the guests will react to her revelation?" The gala day arrived with perfect weather, a crisp autumn afternoon that showed off their modern glass house at its best. Professional decorators had transformed the main floor into an elegant venue, with floral arrangements, subtle lighting, and a small stage area where Julian would make his announcements. Alara spent the morning in careful preparation. She chose a midnight blue dress she had worn to a charity event 3 years prior, the last major function she had attended before her accident. Julian had always said it was his favorite, though he raised an eyebrow when she asked Isla to help her get into it. "Are you sure that's appropriate?" he asked, looking at her wheelchair. The style team brought several options that would be more comfortable. "I want to wear something that reminds everyone of who I was, of who I am," Alara replied with a serene smile. "Don't worry, Isla modified it perfectly." At 6 o'clock, the crew was making the final preparations, while Alara positioned herself in the sunroom adjacent to the main reception area. From this vantage point, she could observe without being immediately visible to arriving guests. Julian was in his element, moving confidently through the space, directing waiters and checking the lighting. He was wearing a new tuxedo Alara had never seen, another small betrayal added to the mountain of larger ones. "Confirmed for 8:30? She heard him ask his assistant. "Yes, Mr. Thorne. The car picks up Ms. Brooks at 8:15. All board members and key investors have confirmed their attendance." Julian nodded, evident satisfaction on his face. "Perfect. Make sure Alara's wheelchair is placed near the back once the guests arrive. Visible enough for appearances, but not in the center." In the casual cruelty of his instruction, he confirmed what Alara already knew. This night was designed to sideline her, while Julian claimed his new future. Guests began to arrive at 7. Alara watched as Julian greeted each one warmly, playing the part of the successful businessman and devoted husband. When he finally brought her into the reception, his hand rested possessively on her shoulder as he guided her through carefully scripted interactions. "Alara has been looking forward to seeing everyone," he'd say, patting her hand. "Haven't you, dear?" Alara played her part perfectly, present but submissive, smiling appreciatively as colleagues and business partners told her how well she looked, just as Julian had instructed. The staff eventually placed her wheelchair in a corner of the main room, partially obscured by a large floral arrangement. At 8:30, the gala was in full swing. Nearly 200 guests filled their home. Board members, investors, city officials, and prominent members of the architectural community. Ilara noted several key figures Julian had been cultivating relationships with: the mayor, Commissioner Thorne, and Marcus, the venture capitalist whose backing Julian had secured for 3 new Thorne Group projects. Precisely at 8:40, a sleek black car pulled up outside. Ilara watched from the window as Julian went out to personally greet Isla, who was radiant in a form-fitting golden dress that accentuated her pregnant belly. He kissed her on the cheek with familiar intimacy, his hand settling on her waist as he guided her inside. The room subtly quieted as they entered. Guests noticed the pregnant newcomer and the possessive way Julian was introducing her to key contacts. Eyes darted between Julian, Isla, and Ilara's wheelchair in the corner. People were connecting the dots and realizing something significant was happening. At 9:10, Julian tapped his glass for attention, heading for the small stage area where a projection screen displayed the Thorne Group Developments logo. Friends, colleagues, esteemed partners, his voice began confidently in the silenced room. Thank you for joining us in our home on this special night. Ilara noted the deliberate use of our home, maintaining the facade of their union even as he prepared to publicly dismantle it. The Thorne Group has always been about vision, Julian continued, about seeing possibilities where others see only obstacles. Tonight, I am thrilled to share our newest vision, not just for our skylines, but for our firm itself. The screen behind him changed to renderings of an ambitious new development, the Horizon, a mixed-use community with stunning modern towers surrounded by green spaces. The Horizon represents our future, Julian declared, building the excitement with every practiced phrase. A future that embraces innovation, sustainability, and new leadership. He gestured to Isla, inviting her to join him on stage. It is my pleasure to introduce Isla Brooks, who is joining the Thorne Group as our new creative director and my partner in bringing the Horizon to life. Applause filled the room, though Ilara noted that many guests seemed uncomfortable. Their eyes moved between Julian, Isla, and Ilara's wheelchair in the corner. Julian placed his arm around Isla's waist. His smile widened. Isla brings a fresh perspective and a brilliant design sensibility to our team. Her vision for accessible and sustainable communities aligns perfectly with the Thorne Group's future direction. The irony was haunting. Julian was co-opting Ilara's lifelong commitment to accessibility as a selling point for his new partner. But tonight is about more than business announcements, Julian continued, his voice softening to a tone Ilara recognized as his most manipulative. It's about honesty and new beginnings. The room became uncomfortably silent as guests sensed what was coming. Life takes unexpected turns, Julian said, looking directly at Ilara for the first time that night. Sometimes it brings challenges that change our path completely. Ilara held a perfect composure, her face revealing nothing as Julian continued his carefully crafted narrative. Ilara's accident 3 years ago profoundly changed both of our lives, he said, his expression a masterpiece of theatrical compassion. Throughout her career, she has demonstrated what it means to adapt to difficult circumstances. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience, everyone appreciating the expected talking points about her courage. But life also brings unexpected joy, Julian continued, turning to Isla with undisguised affection. Sometimes, when we least expect it, we're offered a second chance at happiness. With a theatrical moment, Julian took Isla's hand and placed it on her pregnant belly. Isla and I are expecting a child together in 3 months, a child who represents the future I've always dreamed of. The room erupted in confused reactions, gasps, whispered conversations, and uncomfortable shifts. All eyes turned to Ilara, anxiously awaiting the anticipated breakdown. Instead, Ilara smiled, and she began to move slowly in her wheelchair toward the stage. "Ilara," Julian said, a warning in his voice as she approached. "Perhaps you should—" "I'd like to say something if I may," Ilara interjected, her voice clear and strong, not the timid tone Julian had grown accustomed to. After such a significant announcement, Julian's face flickered with uncertainty. But to refuse her would look heartless in front of so many witnesses. "Of course," he said, offering her the microphone with obvious reluctance. Ilara positioned her wheelchair at the center of the stage between Julian and Isla. She took the microphone and surveyed the room. Friends, colleagues, people who had known her for years, but had accepted Julian's narrative of her decline without question. "First, I want to congratulate Julian and Isla," she began calmly. "A child is always a blessing, regardless of the circumstances." Isla flushed, looking uncomfortably at Julian, who held a rigid smile. "I've known about your relationship for a while," Ilara continued, sparking another wave of murmurs from the crowd. "Just as I knew about the penthouse Julian bought for you in the skyline, using funds from our charity foundation." Julian stepped forward, his hand reaching for the microphone. "Ilara, you're upset. Let's not." "I'm not upset, Julian. I'm finally lucid." Ilara turned to address the audience directly. "Lucid, because I've spent the last 2 months weaning myself off the unnecessary medications Julian has been giving me. Medications that kept me confused, weak, and dependent." The room went completely silent. "You see, Julian didn't just betray me with an affair," Ilara explained, her voice steady. "He systematically undermined my recovery from the very beginning." With practiced precision, Ilara activated a remote control hidden in her hand. The screen behind them switched from the renderings of the horizon to medical records that detailed her prescription regimen. "These are my actual medical records," she explained, as 2 more documents flashed on screen. "And these," the screen split to show a second set of records, "are the doctored versions Julian provided to my care team, increasing my dosages and adding medications known to cause cognitive impairment." Julian's face went white. "This is exactly what I was worried about," he said loudly, trying to regain control. "Ilara has been having paranoid delusions. Her doctors have been monitoring her." "My doctors?" Ilara interjected. "You mean the specialists you carefully selected and met with privately before my appointments? The ones who received specific instructions about emphasizing my limitations rather than my potential for recovery." The screen changed again, now showing emails between Julian and various medical professionals, his instructions highlighted with incriminating detail. Ilara continued methodically, her voice remaining calm. But the medication tampering was only one part of a larger plan. Julian needed control of our finances without my involvement. The projection changed to financial records showing the offshore accounts, the property purchases, and the foundation fund transfers Julian had hidden. Over the past 2 years, Julian diverted over £8 million from our firm and charity foundation, Ilara explained. Money that was meant to fund accessibility projects, but instead financed his new life with Isla, including the penthouse and the £200,000 Mercedes parked in your garage. Marcus, the venture capitalist, stood from his seat. "Julian, is this accurate?" "Foundation funds used for personal expenses." Before Julian could answer, Ilara continued her methodical exposé. "Perhaps most unsettling was discovering Julian's role in my accident 3 years ago." The screen changed to show the security footage Sam had provided, of Julian examining the unsafe platform, then gesturing to the foreman to ignore it, just hours before Ilara's fall. This footage was wiped from the construction site's security system 2 days after my accident, Ilara explained. Thankfully, a conscientious security guard made a backup copy. Julian finally broke, lunging toward Ilara. "You have no idea what you're talking about. You're confused, delusional." Several guests moved to restrain him, shocked by his aggressive lunge toward his disabled wife. "I'm not confused, Julian," Ilara replied calmly. "Not anymore." Then, in the moment she had been preparing for weeks, her hands on her wheelchair's armrests, she slowly and deliberately stood. A collective gasp filled the room as Ilara rose to her full height. She steadied herself and took a single step forward. Then another. Reaching for the small bag attached to her wheelchair, she pulled out a collapsible cane and extended it. "Thanks to proper medical care and intensive physical therapy," she said, standing before the stunned audience. "I've recovered significantly more function than Julian wanted anyone to know was possible." Julian's face twisted in rage and disbelief. "This is a show," he sputtered. "She can barely—" "I can walk with a cane," she corrected. "I can stand for 20 minutes. I can think clearly. All the things you worked so hard to prevent, Julian." She turned to the audience. "I'm not sharing this tonight for revenge, but for accountability. Julian's actions haven't just harmed me, but everyone who believed in our firm's mission and our foundation." The mayor stepped forward. "Ms. Davis, these are serious allegations. Every document I've shown has been verified," Ilara confirmed. "And I have provided full copies to the city attorney's office, the medical board, and the Financial Conduct Authority." As if on cue, the front door opened to admit several people in suits, representatives from law enforcement and regulatory agencies, who had been waiting for Ilara's signal. "Mr. Thorne," announced a stern-faced woman, who identified herself as Special Agent Thorne from the Special Investigations Unit of Scotland Yard. "We need to speak with you about allegations of fraud, diversion, and misappropriation of charity funds." The gala dissolved into chaos as guests scrambled for the exits. Investors made frantic phone calls, and Julian was escorted to a private room for a preliminary questioning. Through it all, Ilara remained standing, supported by her cane, accepting the stunned congratulations and apologies from colleagues who had bought into Julian's narrative of her condition. Isla, pale and trembling, approached Ilara after Julian had been led away. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "About the medications, the accident. He told me your condition meant you were refusing treatment." Ilara looked at her calmly. "What will you do now?" Isla placed a protective hand on her stomach. "I don't know. Everything I thought I knew. My issue isn't with you or your child," Ilara said with genuine compassion. "Julian is the architect of his own downfall." As the last guests left, and investigators continued gathering evidence from Julian's office, Ilara finally returned to her wheelchair, not from an inability to stand longer, but from the simple fatigue of an emotionally draining night. Maya appeared at her side, having waited outside until the confrontation was over. "You were magnificent," she said, squeezing Ilara's shoulder. Ilara looked at the wreckage of the gala that was supposed to be her public humiliation, but had instead become Julian's downfall. "It's strange," she reflected quietly. "I spent 3 years feeling trapped in this chair while Julian walked free. Now, I can stand, and it's his freedom that's in jeopardy." "Poetic justice," Maya replied with satisfaction. Ilara shook her head. "It's not justice, not yet. It's a beginning." A month later, "Ms. Davis, thank you for agreeing to this interview," said Chloe Matthews, adjusting her chair as a camera crew made final lighting adjustments in Ilara's studio, now transformed once more into a bright, creative space filled with architectural models and design plans. Ilara sat in a comfortable armchair instead of her wheelchair, though her cane rested visibly on the side table. "I think it's important to share this story," she replied, "for anyone who might be going through something similar." Chloe nodded. Your case has certainly sparked important conversations about gaslighting, medical manipulation, and financial exploitation within marriages. The interview that followed was exhaustive, but dignified. Ilara recounted her gradual understanding of Julian's betrayal, the evidence gathering, and her strategic approach to exposing him. Many people have called your confrontation at the gala the perfect revenge, Chloe pointed out. How do you respond to that characterization? Ilara considered the question carefully. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth and accountability. Julian didn't just betray me personally. He violated the ethical standards of his profession, the mission of his firm, and the trust of everyone who believed in our commitment to creating spaces that empower, rather than limit, human potential. And yet the personal betrayal was profound. Chloe pressed gently. Yes, Ilara acknowledged. To discover your spouse manipulated your medical care to maintain control is a violation that's difficult to describe. But to focus only on the personal aspect minimizes the broader implications. The interview covered the ongoing legal proceedings against Julian, who was facing multiple federal charges for fraud, diversion, and financial crimes. The prosecution was still investigating whether the allegations related to Ilara's accident could be supported by available evidence. Julian maintains his innocence regarding your fall, Chloe pointed out. He claims the security footage shows only a routine site inspection and a legitimate payment to the foreman. Ilara nodded. The evidence isn't conclusive on that point, but the pattern of subsequent behavior, taking control of my medical care, isolating me from colleagues, manipulating my medication, speaks for itself. After the camera stopped rolling, Chloe stayed for tea, curious about Ilara's next steps. The foundation has been completely restructured, Ilara explained. We've appointed a new board and implemented rigorous oversight protocols. Every pound promised for accessibility projects will be delivered. And the Thorn Group, renamed the Davis Design Group, Ilara said with a small smile. We're honoring all existing contracts, but we're refocusing on sustainable and accessible architecture instead of luxury developments. Across town, Julian sat in his lawyer's office, reviewing the mounting legal challenges he faced. In addition to the criminal charges, Ilara had filed civil suits for medical manipulation and financial fraud. The investigation had frozen most of his assets, and his former business partners were distancing themselves quickly. A plea deal is your best option, his criminal defense attorney advised. The financial evidence is overwhelming. Julian's downfall had been swift and complete. The penthouse meant for Isla had been reclaimed by the restructured foundation. His reputation was in tatters. Former colleagues refused his calls. Even his parents had expressed their disappointment and shame after seeing Chloe's investigative report, which detailed his actions. Isla had cut ties completely after learning the full scope of his manipulation, cooperating with investigators in exchange for immunity. She had returned to her hometown, determined to raise her child away from the scandal Julian had created. Meanwhile, Ilara focused on rebuilding not only her life, but her contributions to architecture and accessibility. With Maya's continued support, her physical recovery progressed steadily. Although she still used her wheelchair for longer outings, she could now walk with a cane for substantial periods, and her doctors were increasingly optimistic about continued improvement. She's remarkably resilient when given the right support, Dr. Reed told her during a follow-up appointment. The human spirit is too, apparently. 3 months later, the first major project of the Davis Design Group under Ilara's renewed leadership was unveiled to significant industry acclaim. The Phoenix Center, named with deliberate symbolism, was a rehabilitation facility designed specifically for patients recovering from spinal injuries and other mobility-limiting conditions. Every aspect of this building was designed to support recovery while maintaining dignity, Ilara explained during the press conference. From the therapeutic gardens to the adaptable living spaces, Our goal was to create an environment that acknowledges the challenges without being defined by them. Maya, who had joined the Phoenix Center as Director of Rehabilitation, stood proudly beside Alara at the podium. Their friendship had evolved into a professional partnership that leveraged both women's expertise. The center was funded in large part with assets recovered from Julian's fraudulent activities, a fact that gave Alara particular satisfaction. What he had intended to use for luxury and deceit was now serving those who most needed support and rehabilitation. She had also reconnected with her twin sister, Lana, who had moved back to Brighton to be closer. The twins were making up for lost time, rebuilding the close relationship Julian had systematically undermined. "He always scheduled something important whenever you planned to visit," Alara recalled during one of their weekly dinners. "I can't believe I didn't see the pattern." "Manipulation works because it's subtle," Lana said. "He gradually isolated you, always with seemingly reasonable justifications." With Lana's encouragement, Alara had begun writing a book about her experience, with the hope of helping others recognize the red flags of gaslighting and financial exploitation. The drafts were honest, detailing both Julian's tactics and her own gradual surrender of autonomy. "The small concessions are the most dangerous," she wrote. "Each one makes the next a little easier to accept, until one day you find yourself living someone else's version of your life." 6 months later, Julian's legal proceedings concluded with a plea deal that included a significant prison sentence, financial restitution, and the permanent revocation of his architectural and development licenses. The evidence of his financial crimes had been too overwhelming to effectively refute. While prosecutors couldn't ultimately prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he had deliberately caused Alara's accident, the circumstantial evidence and pattern of subsequent behavior had been damning enough in the court of public opinion. At Julian's sentencing hearing, Alara delivered a victim impact statement that resonated far beyond the courtroom, as it was reported in architectural journals and mainstream media. Julian Thorne did not only betray his wife, she stated clearly. He betrayed the ethical standards of his profession, the mission of his firm, and the trust of everyone who believed in our commitment to creating spaces that empower rather than limit human potential. She concluded with words many found unexpectedly compassionate. "I hope that during his incarceration, Mr. Thorne has time to reflect on the difference between success and significance, between building a fortune and building a legacy worthy of respect." After the hearing, journalists asked her how she felt about the sentence. "Justice isn't about revenge," Alara responded thoughtfully. "It's about accountability and restoration. The funds Julian stole are being returned to the foundation and will support accessibility projects for years to come. That matters more than the specific length of his sentence." A year later, the Architectural Awards ceremony at the Royal Opera House represented Alara's full return to professional prominence. As she walked to the podium, slowly but independently with her cane, the standing ovation acknowledged not only the groundbreaking accessible housing project being honored, but her personal journey of resilience. "Architecture has always been about problem solving," her acceptance speech began, "about recognizing limitations and finding the beauty within them, not despite them." Alara looked out at the front row, where Maya and Lana were beaming with pride, alongside Karina and other colleagues who had helped rebuild the Davis Design Group from the ashes of the Thorne Group. "My experience has deepened my understanding of how profoundly our physical environments affect our sense of capability and independence," she continued. "Good design is not about accommodating disability. It's about recognizing the full spectrum of human capability and creating spaces where everyone can thrive." The housing project being honored, built on the same site where Julian had planned his luxury development, incorporated universal design principles that made it accessible without feeling institutional. Most significantly, it included a training center where architects and designers with disabilities could develop their skills. The Alara Davis Fellowship for Inclusive Design, she announced during her speech, will ensure our profession continues to benefit from diverse perspectives, including those of us who navigate the world differently because of a disability. After the ceremony, Ilara visited Julian in prison, not to reconcile, but to find closure. He had requested the meeting several times, and she had finally decided it was the right time. Julian had visibly aged in the years since his conviction. The confident, charismatic man who had commanded rooms was diminished in his prison uniform, his carefully maintained appearance now marked by premature lines and gray hair. "Thank you for coming," he said, as they sat across from one another in the visiting room. "I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I," Ilara admitted. An uncomfortable silence hung between them before Julian spoke again. "I've had a lot of time to think about what I did to you, to us. I destroyed something valuable," he said slowly. "Not just our marriage, but the partnership we had built, the vision we shared." Ilara nodded but offered no absolution. "Why did you do it, Julian? Was I not enough after the accident?" Julian looked genuinely pained by the question. "It wasn't about you not being enough. It was about me not being enough. When you got hurt, everyone saw me as the devoted husband taking care of his disabled wife. It gave me a role, an identity that brought me admiration. But secretly, you resented it?" Ilara finished for him. "Yes," he admitted in a low voice. "And once I started down that path with Isla, maintaining both lives required more and more deception. The medications, they gave me control when I felt like I was losing it." His honesty, while belated, was at least something. Ilara stood to leave, noting how Julian's eyes widened slightly at the sight of her walking independently. "You look well," he said. "The physical therapy must be working." "It is," Ilara confirmed. "Though it would have worked better years ago, without your interference." As she prepared to go, Julian asked the question she had anticipated. "Can you ever forgive me?" Ilara considered it carefully before responding. "Forgiveness isn't something that's owed to you, Julian. It's something I may eventually grant myself, the freedom to move forward without carrying the weight of what you did." She walked out of the prison feeling lighter, not from any reconciliation with Julian, but because she had confronted him on her own terms, standing on her own strength. That night, Ilara sat in the garden of her new home, a space carefully designed to accommodate her diverse mobility needs, while still expressing her aesthetic sensibility. She had sold the glass mansion with its painful memories, and had designed this more modest, but far more personal, residence. As dusk fell, she reviewed plans for the Davis Design Group's newest project, a mixed-use development that included intergenerational housing, workspaces, and recreational areas, all designed with universal accessibility principles. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "The Phoenix Center just admitted its first patient. Celebration dinner tomorrow?" Ilara smiled, thinking of how much had changed in 1 year. Julian had intended the gala to be her public humiliation and his triumphant new beginning. Instead, it had become the catalyst for her rebirth and his downfall. She still used her wheelchair sometimes, when fatigue or pain demanded it. She had come to see it not as a symbol of limitation, but as a practical tool that extended her capabilities. Her disability remained a reality, but it no longer defined her identity or limited her potential. Most importantly, she had reclaimed not only her career and independence, but her voice, using it now to advocate for others who might be vulnerable to manipulation and control. "Yes to dinner," she texted Maya back, "and yes to the celebration. We have so much to be thankful for." As night fell, Ilara looked up at the stars, becoming visible over her garden, The path ahead was not perfect or easy, but it was hers to determine. And after all, that freedom was the sweetest victory of all. Wow. Ilara's story reminds us all that resilience often comes from our deepest wounds, and that true strength sometimes only emerges after we've been broken. Click the like button if Ilara's story felt powerful to you, and subscribe to our channel for more stories of resilience, justice, and human courage. Don't forget to ring that notification bell so you don't miss a new upload. In the comments below, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed or experienced gaslighting? What were the subtle signs that something wasn't right? Your perspectives could help someone else recognize a similar situation.